let's talk Supreme Court. Merrick Garland, isn't it strange, right, that the Republicans were able to schedule 9 hearings this week, some of them now been delayed, in 3 days on confirmation hearings. They went 9 months and could not find time to have a hearing, or maybe it's 10 months, for Merrick Garland, President Obama's nominee to the Supreme Court. Could President Obama have done a recess appointment of Merrick Garland at the end of the year, and should he have?
I think there certainly were technical legal arguments that he could have. It definitely would have been challenged. And
Senate was in recess.
Yes. There's a Supreme Court case that dealt a few years ago with recesses during a session. So the question is, did that apply to a recess like this that was in between sessions? But also, I think there was just a practical reality. And also, frankly, if he'd done that, you would have had Merrick Garland on the Supreme Court for 1 year.
A year.
But he would have lost his seat on the very important D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. So, now he stays on that court. He hears important cases. But I think that is so much less the issue than this extraordinary stealing of the seat by the Republicans. This was a seat that opened up when Justice Scalia passed in February of last year. President Obama had nearly a year left in his term. To say that he did not have the right to put this person on the bench was such an extraordinary undermining of our constitutional system of government, our norms and customs in the Senate, that I have to say it is deeply upsetting to have the Supreme Court, which was kind of one of the last sort of branches, institutions of government above the political fray, or at least they tried to be. They didn't always succeed in that, but they tried to be. And frankly, most Americans perceived them to be that way. And to have it drawn down like this was deeply, I personally found as a Supreme Court lawyer, that very upsetting. And so
they got away with it, though.
They got away with it. And then to hear Mitch McConnell say that the American people will not tolerate
any delay, right?
Any delay. When, frankly, Chuck Schumer was simply saying, we are going to give a close and careful review of any nominee's record. And if this is someone who is extreme.
In other words, we'll do our job.
We'll do our job. We're going to advise and consent. No one ever said you had to rubber stamp Merrick Garland. We just said, give this unquestionably qualified nominee a hearing and a vote. And that is what I think the Democrats will do. But doesn't mean they're going to rubber stamp whoever Donald Trump puts forth. They're going to make sure that this person is within the mainstream. Sure, is it someone that I might not pick? Yeah, okay, elections have consequences. But that person still has to be within the mainstream. You can't have someone who's going to promote an extreme conservative agenda from the bench. I don't think Americans will tolerate that.
And someone who is qualified to serve on the bench.
Exactly.
Well, so what can we expect and when?
Well, I think that they have
It's going to happen fast, isn't it?
I think it'll happen pretty soon. They have talked about trying to get someone in time for the last sitting in April. The Supreme Court basically wraps up by the end of June, issuing all of its decisions, which means that it usually, of course, they can, change their schedule, usually ends arguments at the end of April. The Trump team has indicated that they want to try to get someone on the bench in time for the last April sitting, which I think would mean they'd have to put someone forth pretty darn soon.
Yeah, that's awfully ambitious, right? I mean,
yes.
Considering how long these hearings could take.
Yeah, I mean, as you said,
well, they could, they'll try to fast track it.
Sure, of course.
Right.
Well, if curious, so if someone is named and then they're confirmed, and they come in after the oral hearings on, they will, no matter what, on several cases. Can they still act in those cases? Do they if they haven't heard the arguments, or do they just do the paperwork?
In that situation, normally they'll set the case for rehearing, which has happened sometimes. Usually there's a much closer time frame for the rehearing. But so they could rehear the case. They could also try to hold cases for argument. We've seen that in some of the cases that have already been put on the court's docket, but they've been delaying scheduling the argument. And while they don't say their answers, their reasons, I think the answer is probably that they're trying to delay it until there is a full complement of justices on the court. So, you could also have a special session where the court hears cases later than April. There are ways they could get around it, but we've had a Supreme Court that's been hobbled by not having all of its justices for a year,
almost a year,
basically.
Right. Yeah.
And that's not okay. But at the same time, we are not going to stand for rushing through a nominee without the proper process. There needs to be a very close review of this person's record.
And this year there are some particularly important cases, aren't there, in front of the court?
Yeah. It's gotten less coverage because I think a lot of people are, and I think rightfully viewing this court term as sort of a, slow walk. They're trying not to, take huge issues like we've seen in the past years, like merit equality, the Affordable Care Act cases, key immigration cases. But nonetheless, there are very important cases being heard this term. There are important cases about redistricting and racial discrimination, cases involving the death penalty and criminal justice. So there are incredibly important cases, as the Supreme Court always is. If a case is making its way to the Supreme Court, it's probably a really important case for the nation. So it's important that we get someone who is going to be true to the Constitution, true to the law, and true to the Supreme Court, and not just someone who is going to be rushed through to promote an extreme conservative agenda from the court.
Do you hear that the Trump administration is close to one person, or do they have a short list, or what's the skinny out there?
Well, I think, anything is possible with President-elect Trump.
But I know, that's true.
There are
that
some,
is true.
But in this town, there
are some
a few
names.
secrets in this
Yes,
town.
right.
Yeah, so.
And I think, with the list that he put forth with the help of the Heritage Foundation,
15 names or something.
Right, there
like
are
that.
some names. And, the one at the top of that list, we were talking about Jeff Sessions, is a Jeff Sessions friend, Judge Pryor, who, like Jeff Sessions, thinks that Roe versus Wade, in Judge Pryor's words, is, the worst abomination in constitutional law. So, Jeff Sessions can say he says Roe versus Wade is settled law.
Yeah, but
at the same time, when one of, Trump's leading contenders for the Supreme Court thinks that Roe versus Wade is, quote, an abomination of constitutional law, that's a real concern. And that is what I'm talking about when we will not allow this to be rushed through. We need to make sure that most Americans support Roe versus Wade. It is settled law. The Supreme Court has reaffirmed that right over and over, including last term. And a nominee who does not support that, we're going to air that for the American people.